It all began innocently enough. I'd found the listing for the apartment on Carlisle Street by chance, scrolling aimlessly through rentals online. The photos showed a cozy place with old wooden floors, tall windows, and just enough character to make it feel like it had a history, a place that could be home. It was small but perfect. Moving in was easy enough. The building was quiet, almost unusually so, given it was sandwiched between two bustling parts of the city. It was like a pocket of calm in the middle of the storm, an island of stillness. I told myself that was what I needed, a place to unwind and focus. But there was a strange silence to the apartment that only grew louder as the sun went down. I should have seen the signs that first night. As I lay in bed, I felt the oppressive weight of the quiet pressing down on me. My ears strained to pick up the faintest sound, but all I heard was the hum of the fridge and the faint creak of the floorboards cooling in the night air. At the time, I chalked it up to nerves. New place, new routine. But when I finally drifted off, I fell into a dream so vivid it stayed with me, lingering long after I woke. In the dream, I was standing in the kitchen, but it wasn't quite my kitchen. Everything seemed stretched and distorted, the walls oddly tall, the angles subtly wrong. I felt a chill as I moved forward, drawn by some unseen force. My hand reached for the faucet, twisting it slowly. Cold water dripped into the sink, and in the reflection on the faucet, I saw something behind me. A figure, blurred and pale, just out of reach. When I turned, there was nothing there, only the empty, quiet kitchen. I woke gasping, my pulse racing. I shook it off as just a dream, but the image of that figure stayed with me, lurking in the back of my mind. The next night, the dream returned. This time, I was in the hallway. The walls seemed to close in on me as I walked, the air thick with a mildew smell that was so strong I could almost taste it. My feet moved without my consent, leading me to the bathroom. I stared at the door, dread pooling in my stomach, but I couldn't stop myself from reaching out, turning the knob, and stepping inside. The room was dark, silent, but I could feel something there, watching. And then I saw it. Just a flicker of movement in the mirror, a shadow in the corner of my vision. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and I woke up drenched in sweat, my body trembling. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, just my mind playing tricks. But the dreams kept coming. Each night, I'd return to the same distorted version of my apartment, and each night, it was worse. The walls seemed to rot and warp, black mold crawling up from the corners, the floors stained and buckling as if the place were decaying from the inside out. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe, and that mildew smell was everywhere, seeping into my clothes, my skin. I'd wake up each morning feeling more drained, more unsettled, and as the days went on, I started to dread falling asleep. The odd occurrences began to bleed into my waking life. It started with little things. A door that would be open when I was certain I'd closed it, lights flickering when I walked into a room, the faintest hint of that damp, rotting smell clinging to the air. One morning, I found every cabinet door in the kitchen open wide, like the gaping maw of some unseen creature, and I just stood there, too stunned to move. I tried to brush it off, tried to convince myself it was just me being forgetful, or that I was sleepwalking, but the unease gnawed at me, deep and insistent. And the dreams continued, each one dragging me further into the distorted, rotting version of my own apartment, each one leaving me more exhausted and more afraid. I started keeping a journal, hoping that writing everything down would somehow help me make sense of it all. I documented each dream, each strange occurrence, trying to find some kind of pattern, some rational explanation. But as the days went on, the entries grew more frantic, my handwriting becoming jagged and uneven, the words tumbling out in a desperate attempt to capture every detail, every moment of unease. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at the open journal, I felt an icy chill crawl up my spine. The air felt charged, like the moments before a storm, and I became aware of a faint rhythmic thumping sound. It was so subtle I almost convinced myself it was my own heartbeat. But as I listened, I realized it was coming from inside the apartment. Slowly, I rose from the table, my hands clammy with fear, and followed the sound down the hall, each step bringing me closer to the closed bathroom door. The thumping grew louder, more insistent, as I reached the door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to leave, but something compelled me forward. I twisted the knob, pushing the door open, and froze. The bathroom was pitch dark, the kind of dark that felt thick and suffocating, and the walls, they seemed to pulse, faintly, like a heartbeat. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the walls throbbed in time with the rhythmic thumping, and I felt a cold, clammy sensation creeping up my legs, like something unseen was wrapping itself around me, pulling me down. In a blind panic, I stumbled back, slamming the door shut, and fled down the hall, my heart hammering in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the journal clutched to my chest, listening to every creak, every shift of the floorboards. I was afraid to close my eyes, afraid of what I might see, what I might find waiting for me in the distorted, decaying version of my apartment. And as the hours dragged on, I felt a growing sense of dread, a certainty that something was coming for me, something I couldn't escape. The following days blurred together, a haze of sleepless nights and frantic journal entries. I lost track of time, of the days, each one bleeding into the next, each one bringing me closer to the edge. The dreams became indistinguishable from reality, and I found myself wandering the apartment at odd hours, drawn to the bathroom door, feeling the faint pulse of the walls, hearing the faint, insistent thumping. And then one night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I opened the journal and found something that shouldn't have been there. There were entries, pages filled with jagged, frantic writing that I didn't remember writing. The words were scrawled in my own handwriting, but they felt foreign, like they'd been written by someone else, someone desperate, afraid. The entries were short, disjointed, a series of cryptic messages. It's not real. Leave before it's too late. Don't trust what you see. And then, on the last page, written in shaky, uneven letters, was a single sentence. I am here. My breath hitched as I stared at the page, the words blurring in my vision. I didn't know if I'd written it, didn't know if it was a warning or a plea. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here any longer. I stumbled to my feet, grabbing my keys, my wallet, anything I could find, and fled the apartment. I didn't look back, didn't care where I was going, just needed to get away. The cold night air hit me like a shock as I stumbled down the street, my heart racing, the journal clutched in my hands like a lifeline. As I walked, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But that relief was short-lived. I glanced back over my shoulder, just once, and saw a figure standing in the window of my apartment, a pale, shadowy silhouette watching me go. When I blinked, it was gone. But the dread remained, gnawing at me, a dark certainty that whatever had haunted me in that apartment wasn't bound by walls or doors. It had followed me, its presence lingering in the cold night air, whispering in the back of my mind. As I left the apartment, that feeling of suffocating dread lessened with each step, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe I'd finally escaped whatever darkness had taken root in my life. I found a hotel across town, and I checked in, desperate for a few hours of peace. The receptionist handed me a key with a sympathetic look, no doubt seeing the exhaustion etched on my face. Inside the room, I tossed the journal onto the small table and collapsed onto the bed, too weary to think, too numb to fear. But as the minutes stretched into hours, I found myself drawn back to the journal, to those frantic entries I didn't remember writing. I had to know if it would explain something, anything. I opened the journal to the last page, the one with the chilling words, I am here. But now there was something more beneath it, faint, as if scratched onto the page with a blunt object. I squinted, angling the page to the light. The words seemed to shimmer, almost coming to life before my eyes. Look up. My heart began to pound as I glanced around the room, the shadows stretching long and dark in the dim light. I fought the urge to look directly above me, but a twisted compulsion took hold, and slowly I raised my gaze. There, reflected in the small dusty mirror above the bed, was the apartment. My apartment. The flickering light, the warped walls, the dark pulsing shape lingering in the bathroom doorway. I could barely make out a figure standing there, a version of myself, gaunt and hollow-eyed, staring back at me with a twisted expression of recognition. But something was wrong. The mirror version of myself held something in its hand, something dark and glossy, and it took me a moment to realize it was the journal. I felt bile rise in my throat as the realization hit me. I wasn't looking into my current hotel room at all. I was staring into a reflection of that rotting apartment, seeing a version of myself trapped in that nightmarish space. I slammed the journal shut, my hands shaking, but the image remained burned in my mind, the other me, forever in that decaying version of my apartment, holding the journal, as if waiting for me to return, as if it were still inescapably me. The chilling realization hit. I hadn't left anything behind in that apartment. I was the one left behind. As I tried to make sense of this horrific truth, the light in the hotel room flickered. The smell of damp mildew crept in, and when I looked down, the journal's cover had begun to rot, its edges curling, dark patches of mold spreading across the surface. Before I could move, the bathroom door creaked open, and a damp, cold air swept into the room. And I knew, with terrifying clarity, that no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, I would always be trapped, bound to that place, that rotting reflection of myself. Because I'd never truly escaped. I was already home. This story was found on an old tape recorder delivered anonymously to a local homeless shelter. Nobody knows what happened to the person who recorded the tape,